Sir Philip Randolph was an American icon and a complex figure who became one of the most influential civil rights leaders of the 20th century. Born on April 15, 1889, in Crescent City, Florida, Randolph rose from humble beginnings to challenge the most powerful institutions in America and fundamentally alter the relationship between African Americans and the labor movement. He had a distinctive personality marked by unwavering dignity, intellectual rigor, and an absolute commitment to justice through nonviolent action. Randolph's early years were shaped by the contradictions of the post-Reconstruction South. His father, James William Randolph, was an itinerant minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, a man of learning and principle who instilled in his sons a sense of pride and purpose. His mother, Elizabeth Robinson Randolph, was a skilled seamstress who supplemented the family's meager income. The Randolphs were poor in material terms, but rich in values and education. Young Asa, as he was called, learned early that dignity and self-respect were not luxuries but necessities, especially for black people living under the oppressive system of Jim Crow segregation. The Randolph household was filled with books, newspapers, and vigorous discussion of ideas. James Randolph, though he had limited formal education himself, believed passionately in the power of learning. He taught his sons to read early and encouraged them to think critically about the world around them. Asa and his older brother James Jr. grew up in an environment that valued intellectual achievement and moral courage. This foundation would prove crucial in shaping Randolph's future as a leader and thinker. Despite the poverty and racism that surrounded them, the Randolph boys were taught that they were as good as anyone, that their race did not diminish their worth or limit their potential. Asa Philip Randolph attended the Cookman Institute in Jacksonville, Florida, one of the few schools available to black students in the segregated South. He excelled academically and showed a particular aptitude for literature, drama, and public speaking. He was a voracious reader, consuming everything from Shakespeare to the speeches of Frederick Douglass. He developed a rich vocabulary and a formal, elegant speaking style that would become his trademark. His teachers recognized his exceptional abilities and encouraged him to pursue higher education, though opportunities for black students were severely limited. In 1911, at the age of 22, Randolph made a decision that would change his life. He moved to New York City, joining the great migration of African Americans leaving the South in search of better opportunities. New York, particularly the neighborhood of Harlem, was becoming a center of black intellectual and cultural life. Randolph arrived with little money but great ambition. He took whatever work he could find, working as an elevator operator, porter, and waiter while he pursued his education. He enrolled in night classes at the City College of New York, studying political science, economics, and philosophy. He had found a world of ideas that matched his intellectual hunger. In Harlem, Randolph was exposed to radical political thought for the first time. He attended lectures on socialism, read Marx and Engels, and engaged in passionate debates about economics and social justice. He joined the Socialist Party, believing that socialism offered the best path to racial and economic equality. This was a bold and controversial position for a young black man in the early 20th century. Most African American leaders focused on racial issues specifically, but Randolph saw racism and economic exploitation as intertwined problems that required a comprehensive solution. He believed that working-class people of all races shared common interests and should unite against the capitalist system that oppressed them all. In 1914, Randolph married Lucille Campbell Green, a widow and successful beauty shop owner who was well-educated and sophisticated. Lucille was a Howard University graduate, a rarity for black women of that era. She shared Randolph's intellectual interests and supported his political activism, even though it meant financial sacrifice. Her income from the beauty shop provided stability while Randolph pursued his organizing work, which paid little or nothing. The marriage was a partnership of equals, and Lucille's support was crucial to Randolph's ability to dedicate himself to the movement. They had no children, which allowed them to focus entirely on the cause. Randolph began his career as an activist by organizing workers and speaking on street corners about socialism and workers' rights. He was a compelling speaker, combining his formal education with his understanding of the struggles facing working people. His tall, dignified bearing and his precise, eloquent speech commanded attention. He could quote Shakespeare and the Bible as easily as Marx and Debs. He founded a magazine called The Messenger with his friend Chandler Owen in 1917. The magazine promoted socialism and racial equality, taking positions that were considered dangerously radical. During World War I, when most black leaders supported the war effort hoping it would lead to better treatment at home, the Messenger opposed the war as an imperialist conflict that benefited only the wealthy. This stance brought Randolph under surveillance by federal authorities who considered him a dangerous radical. The Messenger became an important voice in Harlem, reaching intellectuals and working people alike. Randolph used the magazine to critique both white racism and what he saw as the inadequate responses of mainstream black leadership. He challenged Booker T. Washington's accommodationist approach and even criticized the NAACP for focusing too much on legal battles and not enough on economic issues. He argued that black people needed economic power, not just legal rights, and that this power could only come through labor organization. His ideas were ahead of their time and often controversial, but they were grounded in a sophisticated understanding of how power actually worked in American society. In 1925, Randolph took on the challenge that would define his career and change American labor history. He was approached by a group of Pullman porters who wanted to form a union. The Pullman Company employed thousands of black men as porters on its luxury railroad sleeping cars. The job was considered prestigious in the black community because it offered steady employment and the opportunity to travel, but the working conditions were harsh and degrading. Porters worked exhausting hours for low wages, were required to provide obsequious service to white passengers, and were called George regardless of their actual names, after George Pullman, the company's founder. They had no job security and could be fired for any reason. The Pullman Company was one of the largest employers of black workers in America, and it was fiercely opposed to unionization. Randolph agreed to lead the organizing effort, though he had never worked as a porter himself. This was actually an advantage because it meant the Pullman Company could not threaten his job. He became the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, a position he would hold for over 40 years. The decision to organize the porters was audacious. No one had ever successfully organized black workers on such a scale. The Pullman Company had enormous power and resources. It hired spies to infiltrate the union, fired workers suspected of union activity, and used both economic pressure and violence to crush organizing efforts. Most established unions refused to help because they either excluded black members or considered the effort hopeless. For 12 years, Randolph led the fight to win recognition for the Brotherhood. It was a grueling struggle that tested his endurance and commitment. He traveled constantly, speaking to porters in cities across the country, often at secret meetings held late at night to avoid company spies. He raised money, wrote articles, organized protests, and lobbied politicians. The porters and their families faced constant intimidation. Many lost their jobs. Some received death threats. Randolph himself was threatened and harassed, but he never wavered. He believed absolutely in the righteousness of the cause and in the dignity of the porters he represented. His strategy combined militant rhetoric with patient, methodical organizing. He understood that building a lasting organization required discipline and persistence, not just passionate speeches. The breakthrough came in 1935 when Congress passed the Railway Labor Act, which required companies to bargain with unions chosen by workers. 2 years later, in 1937, the Pullman Company finally recognized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters as the official representative of its workers. It was a historic victory, the first time a black-led union had won recognition from a major American corporation. The contract that followed brought substantial improvements in wages and working conditions. More importantly, it demonstrated that black workers could organize effectively and win against powerful opposition. The victory made Randolph a national figure and gave him a platform to advocate for broader civil rights issues. The success of the Brotherhood established Randolph as the leading voice for black workers in America. He became a vice president of the AFL-CIO, the first black person to hold such a position in the American labor movement. He used this platform to fight against discrimination within unions themselves, many of which excluded black members or relegated them to segregated locals. He argued that the labor movement could not achieve its goals while practicing racial discrimination, that workers of all races needed to unite against their common exploitation. This position was unpopular with many white union leaders, but Randolph refused to compromise. He believed that integration and equality were not just moral imperatives but practical necessities for the working class. In 1941, as America prepared to enter World War II, Randolph launched the most daring initiative of his career. Despite the wartime emergency, defense industries were refusing to hire black workers, and the military remained strictly segregated. Black people were expected to support the war effort while being denied the economic opportunities and equal treatment that white citizens enjoyed. Randolph saw this hypocrisy clearly and decided to confront it directly. He called for a march on Washington, demanding that President Franklin Roosevelt issue an executive order banning discrimination in defense industries and the military. Proposed to bring 100,000 black people to the nation's capital in a massive demonstration of black political power. The threat of the march terrified Roosevelt and his administration. They feared that such a demonstration would embarrass the government, provoke violence, and undermine national unity at a critical moment. Roosevelt sent his wife Elena and other officials to persuade Randolph to call off the march. They offered various concessions and promises, but Randolph held firm. He wanted a written executive order with real enforcement mechanisms, not vague promises. He negotiated with the president directly, maintaining his dignity and his demands. Finally, just days before the scheduled march, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, which banned discrimination in defense industries and established the Fair Employment Practices Committee to enforce it. Randolph called off the march, having won a significant victory without a single person marching. Executive Order 8802 was a landmark in civil rights history. It was the first federal action against employment discrimination since Reconstruction, and it established the principle that the government had a responsibility to ensure equal treatment. The order did not end discrimination, and the Fair Employment Practices Committee had limited power, but it opened doors for thousands of black workers and established a precedent that would be built upon in later years. More importantly, Randolph had demonstrated a new form of political action. He had used the threat of mass nonviolent protest to force concessions from the government. This strategy would become central to the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Randolph continued to push for military desegregation throughout World War II and after. He organized the League for Nonviolent Civil Disobedience against military segregation in 1948, threatening to encourage young black men to refuse military service unless the armed forces were integrated. This was an extremely controversial position. Many black leaders feared it would be seen as unpatriotic and would provoke a backlash, but Randolph believed that black people should not fight for a country that treated them as second-class citizens. He testified before Congress and met with President Harry Truman, arguing his case with his characteristic eloquence and moral authority. In July 1948, Truman issued Executive Order 9981, which ordered the desegregation of the armed forces. Once again, Randolph's strategy of principled confrontation had succeeded. Throughout the 1950s, Randolph remained active in the civil rights movement, though he was now in his 60s and a new generation of leaders was emerging. He supported the Montgomery bus boycott and the sit-in movement, seeing in them the same principles of nonviolent direct action that he had advocated for decades. He worked closely with Martin Luther King Jr., who admired Randolph and called him the father of the civil rights movement. Randolph saw in King a kindred spirit, someone who combined moral vision with strategic thinking and a commitment to nonviolence. The two men formed a deep bond based on mutual respect and shared values. In 1963, Randolph achieved the goal he had first proposed 22 years earlier. He was the primary organizer of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, which brought over 250,000 people to the nation's capital in the largest demonstration for civil rights in American history. At 74 years old, Randolph was the elder statesman of the movement, the living link between the struggles of the past and the hopes of the future. He opened the march with a speech that emphasized economic justice as well as civil rights, reminding the crowd that freedom meant little without jobs and decent wages. It was the culmination of his life's work, the realization of a vision he had held for decades. The March on Washington was a triumph, and Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech became its most memorable moment. But the march also reflected Randolph's particular vision of the movement. He had insisted that it focus on economic issues as well as civil rights, that it bring together labor unions and civil rights organizations, that it be disciplined and peaceful. The march demonstrated the power of nonviolent mass action and helped build momentum for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Randolph had lived to see many of the goals he had fought for become law. Randolph's later years were marked by continued activism despite declining health. He remained president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters until 1968, when he finally retired at age 79. He continued to speak out on issues of civil rights and economic justice, though his influence was waning as younger, more militant voices gained prominence. Some young activists criticized him as too conservative, too willing to work within the system, too committed to nonviolence in an era when many were embracing black power and armed self-defense. Randolph understood their anger and frustration, but he never abandoned his belief in integration, nonviolence, and the power of organized labor. Throughout his career, Randolph maintained a distinctive personal style that set him apart from other leaders. He dressed impeccably in tailored suits, spoke with formal precision, and carried himself with an aristocratic bearing that commanded respect. This dignity was deliberate, a refusal to accept the degraded status that white society assigned to black people. He believed that how you presented yourself mattered, that self-respect was the foundation of demanding respect from others. He was courteous but never obsequious, firm but never crude. His style reflected his belief that black people should demand equality, not beg for it. Randolph's political philosophy evolved over his lifetime, but certain core principles remained constant. He believed in the fundamental dignity of all people and the right of workers to organize and bargain collectively. He believed in integration, not separation, arguing that the goal should be a society where race became irrelevant, not one where races lived apart. He believed in nonviolence, both as a moral principle and as a practical strategy. He He believed in democracy and constitutional rights, even when those rights were denied to black people. He was a socialist in his youth, but his socialism was always democratic and evolutionary, not revolutionary. He believed change should come through persuasion, organization, and political action, not through violence or dictatorship. Randolph's relationship with other civil rights leaders was complex. He respected W.B. Du Bois's intellectual brilliance, but disagreed with his later embrace of communism. He admired Thurgood Marshall's legal victories, but believed that court decisions alone could not achieve true equality. He worked closely with Roy Wilkins of the NAACP and Whitney Young of the Urban League, but he thought they were sometimes too cautious and too focused on middle-class concerns. He had genuine affection for Martin Luther King Jr. and saw him as the leader who could unite the movement, but he worried that King's focus on Southern segregation sometimes overlooked the economic issues facing black workers in the North. He was critical of Malcolm X's separatism and rhetoric of violence, though he understood the anger that fueled it. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s achieved many of the legal victories that Randolph had fought for, but the economic justice he had always emphasized proved more elusive. The Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act ended legal segregation and secured voting rights, but poverty, unemployment, and economic inequality persisted. Randolph continued to argue that civil rights without economic opportunity was incomplete, that black people needed jobs and decent wages, not just the right to sit at lunch counters. He supported the Poor People's Campaign and other efforts to address economic inequality, but these efforts never achieved the same success as the fight against legal segregation. On May 16, 1979, A. Philip Randolph died in New York City at the age of 90. He had lived long enough to see the legal structure of Jim Crow dismantled, and to see black people voting, holding office, and participating in American life in ways that would have seemed impossible when he was born. But he also saw that racism and inequality persisted in new forms, that the work he had begun was far from finished. His funeral was attended by labor leaders, civil rights activists, and political figures from across the spectrum. He was eulogized as a giant of American history, a man who had devoted his entire adult life to the cause of justice. Randolph's legacy is that of a pioneer who laid the groundwork for the modern civil rights movement. He demonstrated that black workers could organize effectively, that nonviolent direct action could force concessions from powerful institutions, and that economic justice and civil rights were inseparable. His strategy of threatening mass demonstrations to pressure the government was used repeatedly by later civil rights leaders. His insistence on dignity and self-respect influenced how the movement presented itself. His commitment to integration and nonviolence shaped the movement's goals and tactics. Modern historians recognize Randolph as one of the most important civil rights leaders of the 20th century, though he never achieved the same fame as figures like Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. His contributions were often behind the scenes, in patient organizing work rather than dramatic confrontations. He built institutions like the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters that outlasted individual campaigns. He mentored younger leaders and provided strategic guidance. He connected the civil rights movement to the labor movement, understanding that racial justice and economic justice were linked. Perhaps the most fitting assessment of A. Philip Randolph comes from his own principles and the life he lived. He believed that real change came through organization, not just inspiration, through persistence, not just passion. He faced opposition from white supremacists, hostile corporations, skeptical government officials, and sometimes from within the black community itself, but he never wavered in his commitment to justice. He combined intellectual sophistication with practical organizing skills, moral vision with strategic thinking, militancy with discipline. Randolph represented a particular type of American leader, the radical reformer who challenged fundamental injustices while working within democratic institutions. He was called a dangerous radical by some and too conservative by others, which suggests he occupied a principled middle ground. His socialism was tempered by his commitment to democracy and nonviolence. His militancy was balanced by his patience and strategic thinking. He understood that lasting change required building organizations and winning allies, not just making dramatic gestures. In the end, A. Philip Randolph was neither a perfect man nor a saint, but rather an extraordinary individual who dedicated his life to the cause of justice. His legacy includes the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the March on Washington, and the integration of the military and defense industries. He is remembered today as a founding father of the modern civil rights movement and as a symbol of dignity, persistence, and moral courage. His life spanned an era of incredible change, from the depths of Jim Crow segregation to the legal victories of the civil rights movement, and he helped drive that transformation through decades of patient, principled struggle.